Welcome into 5 Wide Fantasy today, getting into the waiver wire, heading into week 9 of the fantasy football season. I've got 5 must-add players for you for this week. I say must-add, but really at this point in the season, the waiver wire can be pretty barren, especially if you're in 12, 14-team leagues. But I'm going to cover every position here, so if you need some streamers at the tight end spot, quarterback spot, or you're looking for some upside, do have a couple players I think have some upside, and then some players that with the bye weeks back heading into this week, there are some players here that you can plug and play. So I'll get into the 5 players, and then I'll rapid fire a few others that are closer to that 50% threshold. Again, all these guys less than 50% rostered right now in fantasy football leagues. If you guys do enjoy today's video, would really appreciate if you did hit that like button for me. Subscribe to the channel as well. I have plenty of exciting content heading into this week. Looking at the second half of the fantasy season, I'll have some second half busts as well. Don't forget to follow the Shorts channel too for some more content there. Let's get into these players. First up, probably the player I think I'm most excited about when it comes to the long-term future, Demario Douglas of the New England Patriots. Currently 3% rostered. We had some injuries here with the Pats that really open up the opportunity for him, losing Kendrick Bourne for the remainder of the season with the ACL injury, and then Devontae Parker with a very scary hit is going to be in concussion protocol. Pretty well guarantees us he's probably going to miss this week, and then we'll see what it's like moving forward for him. But Bourne was really the guy dominating when it comes to routes run. Pretty decent target share. I mentioned last week even just the share of this Patriots offense is tough to get a handle on because we have these tight ends. We have a number of receivers running routes. But now things become much less murky. And for the former 6th round pick, this seems like a guy that the Pats really do love. He obviously led the Patriots this past week in routes run, targets, and receptions. Didn't turn it into a big fantasy week, just 5 receptions for 25 yards. Definitely not going to cut it. But suddenly, like I said, the competition really comes for those routes, and the targets is lessened with those injuries. And now we have Jalen Reagor, who is second on the team in routes run, and then Juju Smith-Schuster get on the field a little bit, scored a touchdown as well, which can be someone that can compete. But that competition and that talent isn't really there. So for Douglas, targeted on 24.4% of his routes run, pretty solid there. But he has yet to run 30 routes in a game this season, despite the fact the Patriots are averaging over 35 pass attempts per game. We've seen them in a ton of passing game scripts. Probably isn't going to change. This isn't too good of a Patriots team. So what I'm excited about is obviously for Douglas, getting on the field more, continuing to turn his when he is on the field into targets, which he can definitely do even more so now with the lack of competition. And then what's really exciting is looking at the Patriots schedule. 4 of the Patriots' next 5 games are against defenses that are bottom 10 in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. Fantastic. Washington, Giants, Chargers, and the Steelers. So we're going to miss Bourne for the rest of the season. We're going to see no Devontae Parker, I think, this week in a good matchup against Washington. This is a guy that you could potentially play right off the hop because, again, this Patriots team is struggling to run the football, and they're just ultimately a team that is going to struggle against the majority of teams in the league and giving some passing game scripts. So I like Douglas. The rookie seems to be a player that the team definitely loves, and now they're going to give every opportunity to him to be the number 1 receiver in this offense, where before it was so muddy, there was nobody you could start. Douglas is someone you could pretty much immediately play based on the opportunity he has now. Now we roll into the running back position. Emari Demercado is 36% rostered, so pretty widely available still. So it did feel like he is someone we need to talk about. We talked about him a couple weeks ago as a player to add in this offense, and now he has what I kind of view as a clear control of the backfield. In the first week, they played without James Conner. It didn't seem that way, but the last 2 weeks have definitely turned out to be this being Demercado's role to lose. 42 snaps for him, 28 for Keontae Ingram, and just 3 for Damian Williams. So he has that share of the running back snaps. Ingram kind of coming in that change of pace role, getting in on passing downs, which I thought Mercado could get a little bit more of in the receiving game, but it looks like Ingram will have this role pretty well handled. But the reason I still like Demercado, despite the fact he's not getting the field and running routes, he's just getting a lot of the touches in the running game. Josh Dobbs. Oh my God. This is a Cardinals team that probably could have honestly won that game against the Ravens if he was not so terrible. He's 6th in the NFL in turnover-worthy plays this season. He had 2 interceptions and 3 turnover-worthy plays against the Ravens last week alone. He is not doing a good enough job taking care of the football for this team, and I think we saw with Demercado's usage this past week, getting 21 touches in a game that they were trailing for most of the second half, tells me that, hey, we give the ball to Demercado, we're going to take care of it. We're going to give the defense a chance to keep us in the game. So I like seeing that there for him. And with James Conner on IR, without much talk from the staff of what to expect in his return or when he will return, we're going to see Demercado for at least the next 2 weeks. Who knows? It could be even more. Not a lot of clarity when it comes to the James Conner eventual return. Now, the reason I talk about Demercado as the potential of volume and not talking about production is because the matchups are not fantastic the next 2 weeks. He's got Cleveland and Atlanta. Now, Atlanta did lose one of their top, I'm forgetting who it is now, one of their top D tackles to injury, so that could definitely potentially benefit their running game being a little bit better. And the Browns aren't a top 10 run defense right now this season, so it's not an absolutely tantalizing matchup. Houston does come in week 11. Connor could be back for week 11, but if he is not, that's going to be a good matchup for Demercado and one you could play him in. And when we're getting into bye weeks, this is a guy that is going to be the starter here and should receive enough opportunities to be a potential flex option. And right now on the waiver wire, that is well worth it. Speaking of players without a lot of curb appeal, Royce Freeman, 22% rostered right now in fantasy leagues, so almost 80% of leagues he is available. Looking at this Rams backfield and looking at this Rams offense moving forward, hopefully Matthew Stafford's going to be okay. That thumb injury looked nasty. But Freeman was the more effective back this past week against the Cowboys. Have to mention it wasn't a blowout, so we will see if the usage remains the same. But 9 carries for 44 yards, whereas Darrell Henderson had 12 carries for just 31 yards. And Freeman's work and efficiency got him rewarded with an inside the 5 carry that ultimately turned into a touchdown. So put together a pretty decent week if you were somehow starting him. I doubt anyone was on a non-bye week. But Freeman as well actually ran more routes than Henderson, 18-12. Henderson was the beneficiary of 3 targets, 3 receptions, and 54 receiving yards. So Freeman didn't actually turn his routes run into any production, which some people might see obviously a problem. He needs to be getting the ball a little bit more in this area if he's running this many routes, but he ran more routes. So it could be in another week, we see him next week actually be the guy getting the receptions and more of the production from this utilization. But that's not what we saw this past week. But the underlying numbers tell us Freeman's the guy, more of the guy in the receiving game. And when you look at the Rams as well, seeing Freeman get that inside the 5 carry can be really, really important when we're looking for which player we want to roster in fantasy. I think Henderson's still the guy with the edge, but the Rams have been very effective, not just this season, but in seasons past, when they are rushing the ball inside the 5 and in goal-to-go situations. They have 9 total carries inside the 5 this year and 7 touchdowns. And we're talking about guys like Kyren Williams, Darrell Henderson, and Royce Freeman. So these aren't incredibly talented players getting it done for them. This is a schematic kind of masterclass here from Sean McVay, being able to find those scores in this area of the field. So we still don't really know who has this role between Freeman and Henderson. They both have 1 inside the 5 carry apiece, 3 red zone carries for Henderson, 2 for Freeman. So it seems like there might be a slight edge to Henderson here in this role, but ultimately it could be Freeman's. Again, based on the efficiency, he was a little bit better in the ground game and then ultimately got that inside the 5 carry. So really it might just come down to who's been the better back. Freeman has a chance to be that guy. It's not like Henderson has this massive edge over him in opportunities. So Freeman is still an opportunity to get this number 1 role. Green Bay comes up this week. Definitely a plus matchup. They're a bottom 10 unit in fantasy points allowed to running backs this season. We saw Cam Akers find the end zone this week against the Packers. And they follow that up with a bye, Seattle, and then Arizona could be a good matchup. We'll see what the timeline is for Kyren Williams. We don't know. I don't know if, by the time we get to this Arizona matchup, if these two guys will be battling it out for this number 1 spot. But at the very least, you have a matchup this week where if you pick him up, there is the potential of playing him if you're dealing with some really bad luck with these bye weeks and some of the players you're going to be missing. Now to the tight end spot, Trey McBride. This is probably the number 1 ad this week if he is still on your wire, and he's on the wire in 80% of leagues, only 20% rostered. Huge opportunity that awaits for him with Zach Ertz on IR now. We saw McBride get in the field a little bit this season, but Ertz was still holding the edge, and they were utilizing these guys a fair bit, getting them the ball a ton. Believe it or not, the Cardinals are targeting their tight ends the 3rd most in the entire league. Only the Chiefs with Travis Kelce and the Falcons with Jonnu Smith and Kyle Pitts have targeted their tight ends more than the Cardinals have so far this season. And obviously for McBride, turned that opportunity into some of the best production in all of fantasy at the tight end spot this past week. 14 targets, 10 receptions, 95 yards, and a touchdown. That is the dream at the tight end spot. And you could get this week in and week out. Maybe not this exact production, but the type of production that puts him into the elite tier when you look at the opportunity that's ahead for him, because he ran the 2nd most routes on the team, only behind Marquise Brown. I think he ran 2 less routes than him. He ran more routes than Rondale Moore, ran more routes than Michael Wilson. This is going to be the norm too, because This is the type of route participation we're seeing from the tight ends in this offense. They're running their tight ends out there a ton. And now that there's no Zach Ertz, we're going to see McBride running, he ran 35 routes in this game. If he continues to run that many routes, that's going to be amongst the elite tight ends in the league. Like Dallas Goedert leads the league in routes run at the tight end spot, and he's running right around 35 routes per game. So we're going to be on the field a ton. This team loves to target their tight ends. Josh Dobbs is still going to be the quarterback for at least the next week or two. I don't know what the deal will be with Kyler Murray. The Cardinals are just not telling us anything about any of their players. They don't have to, and they decide not to. I really don't think Jonathan Gannon needs any advantage, or this advantage he thinks he has of not telling us what the injury news is with these players is going to benefit him. But regardless, we're going to take what we have from this team, and McBride looks like a valuable piece to add right now. Now, the quarterback spot, Derek Carr. 37% rostered. I find in a lot of my leagues, there's tons and tons of quarterbacks in my 1QB leagues on the wire. Carr should be on a plenty of fantasy football waiver wires. He's only the quarterback 18 right now in the season. But some of these numbers are very, very interesting and exciting to get behind from a streaming perspective. He's put up 3 straight 300-plus yard passing games and 4 total on the season. That's half of his starts. He's made 8 starts this year. Half of his starts have been for 300-plus passing yards. The reason we're seeing that is because, he leads the NFL in deep targets by a wide margin. He has 47 deep targets. The next closest quarterback, who's the number 2 QB in deep targets, has 36 on the year. So he's creating significant separation. And everybody clamors, like, bring Jameis Winston back, bench Derek Carr. We want to see Jameis Winston. Derek Carr is doing what Jameis Winston was doing in his prime years, throwing the ball deep. The difference is, he's not completing nearly enough of them. He's only got a 31.9% completion percentage on these deep passes. So if he can improve there, he can be a difference maker at the quarterback spot in fantasy moving forward. In plus matchups and down matchups with this Saints offense, I definitely do not want to play him, but we get back-to-back really good matchups for Carr, Chicago and Minnesota. Chicago is 27th in fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. Minnesota is 23rd, and we don't even have an update on Chicago after Herbert's big game on Sunday night. So 2 good matchups. You could probably add him this week, keep him on your roster for next week as well, because I do think things will go very well against Chicago. Should be able to move the ball really effectively with the Bears, just lacking any type of pass rush. Should see Carr have plenty of time in the pocket and continue to attempt a ton of passes of 20-plus air yards. So love Carr as an add this week, 37% rostered, an immediate plug into your roster. Say you lost Kirk Cousins with his injury, Carr is the guy you definitely want to add in the short term. Now, rapid firing here, about 6 guys, some players that are near that 50% threshold that I do want to mention. Jamal Williams, if he is on your wire, I would definitely go add him. Dennis Allen was saying that he's still on a snap count right now, so I would be eager to see what happens when he is no longer on this snap count. Could we see him getting some opportunities inside the 5 to convert some touchdowns? Because again, New Orleans has not been good in the red zone so far this year. I would think that's why they brought Jamal Williams in. That's like the only thing he does well. He is not somebody I want to hand the ball off to at the 50-yard line and ask him to make an explosive play. Taysom Hill is putting up elite tight end numbers. If you can still get him, like he led the team. Yeah, he led the team in rushing yards this past week. He had like 9 rush attempts. Obviously getting involved with a couple of pass attempts. Could see him catching some passes as well. Definitely if he's still out there. Jeff Wilson, we saw McDaniel say he wants to get him more touches. He did exactly that. Look, Wilson had the edge over Mostert last season. If Wilson is healthy, there is a decent chance he could get the edge in the touchdown department, because that's where he really had his edge last year. So if he's on your wire, he's less than 50% rostered right now. Definitely need to stash him and see what happens. And then 3 other guys, Rashid Shaheed. I can't trust. It's really hard to trust and play him because he doesn't run a ton of routes and he's so reliant on the explosive plays. But man, he would have won you a week if you played him this week. Quentin Johnston, Josh Palmer, and that knee injury, he did manage to come back. But is there a chance that knee injury is going to be a problem moving forward? We'll see. Johnston got the most targets, the most receptions of his career. I'm not a big believer in Johnston. I am a Chargers fan, so I feel like I have a good feel for this team. But I would add him because there is the chance that if Palmer is out, they're going to have to get Johnston a little bit more involved and try to play off of his skill set, because otherwise this Chargers team would be in some major trouble. And then last is Devin Singletary. Pierce still has the advantage. They're both not running the ball effectively, but Singletary continues to eat into his usage. Honestly, I think of all the running backs right now that Singletary might have the best chance as right now a backup to potentially grab the number 1 role. So I would add him if you're in some of these deeper leagues and someone to potentially stash if anything changes there significantly, because he is getting some touches. Anyways, those are some of the guys that I didn't mention that I quickly wanted to touch on. And those are my must-add players heading into week 9 of the fantasy football season. Guys, if you have any questions about these guys or any other players that I didn't mention that you want to hear about, or whatever's going on in your fantasy league heading into this week, happy to answer those questions down below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we will see you in the next one.